yeah, let's start the second half with possibly the cruelest question in the quiz. What about that? So I've got an image, it's spelled right, it's got a source, it's there, but some JavaScript just before it is going to document.write an HTML comment. I know, this is horrible, isn't it? I love this. So, once again, like most of the examples we've seen, that image is not going to appear on the page because it's going to be inside a comment. Because I've also got the end of the comment there straight afterwards. But are the browsers still going to request the image? Even if they get halfway and abort it, how far are they going to get? So I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. When I first did the 20-minute version of this quiz a couple of weeks ago as a test, I had to go and look at the code behind this, the bit that was scoring, because I was just like, the needles are all just going into the middle. This must be something I've coded wrong, because it can't just be that accurate 50-50 split. But yeah, it is. It's interesting. A little bit less confident in IE. IE is going to make the request, is it? The answer? Firefox and IE will make the request here. And this is a symptom of that extra parser that they have. All the browsers have this extra parser, but we're kind of seeing a difference in the implementation and behavior here. So when the inline script is encountered, Safari and Chrome, they will stop and they'll wait to see what the script comes up with before it parses any further if it's inline. If it's an external script, like it's got a source, it'll carry on, the preparser will carry on and that image would have been requested. But if inline scripts, it waits because it assumes like, oh, maybe you're doing something more complicated there. Whereas Firefox and IE, they will just go right ahead. So if you want to do some kind of hackery with this, you would need to put a no script element around the image as well if you wanted it to definitely not request. And then you could use JavaScript to pull out that comment.
But doesn't that mean, because you couldn't parse that inline script, you couldn't execute it unless all the external scripts above it that were synchronous had already downloaded?
Yes, yes.
So isn't that going to mitigate the power of the preloader?
So I kind of think that Firefox and IE are doing the right thing here. I think being able to jump ahead beyond inline scripts is a good idea. How much of a performance impact it has, I don't know. But yeah, the inline script is going to hold up with the external ones as well. So yeah, and it's quite common to see like little bits of inline script throughout a document, right? So we could be actually shooting our preparser in the foot in Chrome and Safari by doing things this way. So this could be something that we could improve. So yeah, I think Firefox and IE are getting it right here. But yeah, if it's an external script, everything's fine there. Okay, so this one's maybe less evil. I would say that other one was the most evil question, but imagine you've got a page and it's full of lorem ipsum like this, and it's 595 pixels. It's got like 200 pixels high, and we've got a lot of lipsum inside there. Which browsers are going to download cool.gif? So this is a media query. We can see the media query saying like, I want this to appear beyond 800 pixels when the browser width is beyond 800 pixels. So we wouldn't expect it to appear on the page, but which browser is going to download it anyway in a kind of speculative, oh, well, maybe they're going to use the background image. Sounds like a waste of bytes to me, but we've seen already that browsers are doing crazy things. I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. So we're saying yes we're saying yes in all the browsers. Oh no, except Safari, and very unsure about Chrome. The answer? No, we're safe here. This one's fine. None of the browsers are going to download this. You're pretty safe. You've been safe for a while, but not forever. So here I've got like I'm assigning a desktop style background, and then if the page is less than 600 pixels wide, I'm going to assign like a mobile background. This is written desktop first, right, or often mobile first. And in this case, Android 2 and 3 will download both. So this is something to watch out for. And it's not just Android 2 and 3, it's like BlackBerry 6, Kindle 3, Safari 4, anything that's using that old version of WebKit. But really, Android 2 and 3 are the only ones you're going to encounter in the wild. And I personally think it's something Google should come out and publicly apologize for. But hopefully that will be fixed sooner rather than later. Because of this, it's best to write your CSS mobile first. Because if you do get an old mobile device encountering this, the media query doesn't apply to it, so it stops there. It won't actually pick up the desktop background. It will only download the mobile one. Android 2 and 3 will do the right thing. So And okay, if someone is running a really old version of WebKit, which isn't really in the wild, but they could be on desktop, they're going to get a double download here. But I would rather a desktop machine was downloading an extra mobile background than a mobile downloading an extra desktop background. So it seems a sensible thing to do. Tim Kadlec, who is speaking here as well, has done a good piece of research on this. I would say most of it now is kind of, well, it's not redundant information because the Android 2 and free stuff still applies, but it's a really interesting read nonetheless of the state of things not that long ago, just last year. Okay, let's get trickier. Same situation again, but now we're very close. We're very close to the point where that background is going to appear. So are the browsers going to do something different here? We saw them doing the right thing with 800 pixels, but when we're at min width 600 pixels, what's going to happen there? Yeah. So we've got like a slightly different opinion coming through for the WebKit browsers, which is interesting. Okay, I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. Interesting. Who thinks Safari is doing something different here? Who's prepared to have a guess why? There are books. I can bribe you with books. Doesn't matter if you're wrong. I will give you a book just for saying a word. No one's actually going to say anything. Never mind. Okay. So the answer, I've got lots of books to take home with me. Brilliant. The answer is these three browsers will request the image. Not only will they request it, they will display it as well. Anyone know why?
Scrollbar.
Scrollbar. Yes, that is correct. I have been very sneaky here. The screenshot does not include the width for the scrollbar. You get a book. And someone else shouted out, please yourselves, you can get a book at the end as well, because if you know that, it's brilliant. So here, most of the browsers, they treat the scrollbar as being part of the page. So they see it as 610 and they will download the background and display it. Whereas Safari ignores the scrollbar so it's less than 600 pixels. So that was a clever bit of misdirection, but they don't call me Clever Jake. They don't call me Clever Jake. It's very sad.
So if let's say it doesn't have that much text, say the text is only fits within the screen, so there's no scroll bar, then Safari.
If you're not triggering a scroll bar, either because you don't have the text or because you can force a scroll bar anyway with CSS. So yeah, if the scroll bar's not there, you see the ambiguity go away between these two. And personally, I think that it seems to me that Safari's doing the smarter thing here because I don't care about the scroll bar because I can't affect that part of the page. Why should I care if the user has a 200 pixel scroll bar, which they could do in Windows, go into the settings. And it seems insane to me, but including the scroll bar as part of the width of the page is mandated by the specification. It requires this of browsers. So Safari is doing it wrong. And Chrome only fixed this in the latest stable release a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure if Safari is looking to fix this. I tested this in the nightlies yesterday, and the scroll bar is broken completely in the nightly. So that might be them starting to fix this, or it might just be that they've broken the scroll bar. So I don't know. Does anyone know why the scroll bar is included in part of the measurement? Anyone being brave? Okay, here's the reason. Consider this bit of CSS. HTML overflow hidden, no scroll bar, regardless of content. But when the width gets to 600 pixels, we're going to display a scroll bar. In Safari, it's going to go, right, this is 500 pixels, no scroll bar. This is 601 pixels. I'm going to show a scroll bar. Oh, it's 584 pixels now. So I'm going to take the scroll bar away. Oh, I'm going to put it back. And we see what happens. In reality, the browser doesn't actually get into a loop like this. It just makes a decision once, but that can still produce a really odd effect. Here's a screencast I made of the issue. So in this example, as I make the browser wider, it's going to introduce a scroll bar, and it's going to introduce a CSS background at the same point. So we can see as I resize the browser, we don't have a background, but then we get to a point, and every time the width changes, it makes a different decision about what should happen on the page. Until you get beyond the point of ambiguity, and then everything settles down. And the point of ambiguity is equal to the width of the scroll bar. So this doesn't happen in Firefox IE and Chrome. They've fixed that problem. But this problem is also why we can't just ship responsive elements. Developers are crying out for this. I'm crying out for this. Because the whole using media queries thing just seems like a hack to me. I don't really care about the width of the window. I care about the width of the element itself. And that should affect the layout of it. But this just adds too much interdependency and recursion. I mean, the simplest example would be like width 500, but then when you're over 300 pixels, go to 200 pixels. But in reality, we wouldn't do this because we know it's going to cause a problem. But in the wild, it would be a complex interdependency with lots of different elements that causes one to wrap and get a bigger width that then changes to not wrap. And the whole layout engine becomes massively complicated. And we'll get that issue where, as you scroll, a different decision is made every time. Of course, we already have a way to lay out elements in the browser window according to an ancestor, a specific ancestor, rather than the whole window itself. Iframes. Iframes do this. They have their own viewport. And it works because their insides cannot affect the outsides. But the downside is you have to give it a fixed width and height. Well, or you can give it a height that's relative to the outside of the iframe, but it is not affected by the inside. And if we gave you this as a solution for responsive elements, it's not good enough, because you would want the height at least to be dynamic. But we're looking at ways of doing that. And of course, if you ever think that iframes are the answer to your problem, death or glory awaits, right? You're either going to do something amazing or you're going to lose everything. There is no in between. So it feels like a while since we did a question. Let's do another one of those. Let's get away from loading images. We've been talking about that far too long. What about this? So here's a script element. It's got a source. It has a type of text HTML. It's not a script type. What do you think? We wouldn't expect it to execute, or would we? Does the type attribute apply to a script element? Do the browsers do something different here? Okay, I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. So we're saying yes in most of the browsers, very yes in Internet Explorer. The answer? Firefox and IE, yeah, they will make the download here. They won't execute the script, but they will download it. And these browsers are getting it wrong. The specification says if it's not a supported scripting language, then abort the steps and don't execute the script. And that happens before the download is triggered. So we wouldn't expect those browsers to do that. And historically, the WebKit browsers would do the same. They would have downloaded at this point. They changed. They became more spec compliant. And this was something that was used by different script loaders. Lab.js was one of them. And what they would do is add script elements to the page with the wrong type, because they would load and they would trigger a load event or an error event. I think it was a load event. And then once you've got all the load events, which could be in any order, because if you add scripts to the page with JavaScript, they will just load as soon as and execute as soon as they arrive. And when all of the set that you were interested in had loaded, you would then take them out of the document, fix the type, and add them back in. And because they were already in the cache, they would just execute straight away, and you were controlling the execution order. And so WebKit broke a lot of these script loaders by becoming more spec compliant. So it's a good lesson to, if you're relying on browser behavior rather than specified behavior, that could come around and bite you later on. Okay, what about this? This is a similar question. We're still dealing with the incorrect types, but this time on a style sheet. So once again, text HTML, not a valid CSS type. We saw Firefox and IE downloading at this point wrongly, so with scripts. But what about with styles? Are they more strict or less strict when it comes to MIME types? I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. So we're leaning towards yes, but less sure in the WebKit browsers, so kind of mirroring what happened with script. Well, I suppose as a group, you've said yes to everything, so you are, as an average, all correct. All browsers will download in this situation. And not only do they download it, they will apply it as well. Those styles will be applied. And they're all breaking the spec by doing this. So with scripts, with CSS, don't use the type attribute. Just don't use it, because you don't need it. It has a default. It has the right default. We don't have multiple scripting engines in the browser unless you go back far enough. But even if you miss out the script type, it will default to JavaScript. So just the worry here is we've got all of the browsers that are breaking the spec. So if you wrote a page now and you wrote the type attribute and you wrote text/CCS, it's going to work. It's going to work fine. But then some browser's going to come and go, oh, we're breaking the spec here, fix themselves, and your page will load with no styles. So avoid the text attribute, the type attribute completely. Okay, what about this? So this is similar to the question we just had, but this time driving it with JavaScript. So creating a link element, it's a style sheet. But no, we're not doing anything with type yet, kind of giving away the next question. But it's not being added to the document. So would we expect a download here? What do you think? Do the browsers even agree in this situation? So I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. So we're saying no in this situation because it's, I guess, because it's not in the document. And yeah, you're all correct. This is the, link doesn't work this way. We saw images work this way because the creation steps are run as soon as the element's created, even if it's not added to the document. But link does not work this way, and that's part of the spec as well. It says, it should download when the element is created or when the element is inserted into the document, and then the little kind of byline at the end, whichever happens last. So that's important. So if the element is created before it goes into the document, it won't download until it is in the document. OK, so now I'm setting the type incorrectly. We've got text JavaScript, so obviously that's not a valid style type. We are adding it to the document this time. And all the browsers support document.head. I'm not doing a trick there. It's a relatively new API, but it is supported. So the wrong MIME type, we saw it affect browsers. We saw browsers getting it wrong twice. With link elements, they all downloaded it. Do they do something different with the DOM? We saw with script elements, IE and Firefox doing something different. I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. So we're coming out with yes in most of the browsers, less sure about WebKit. WebKit will download. Firefox and IE will not. And this is kind of why I love browsers, because we've seen in the past few questions when we've been dealing with incorrect MIME types, like with an element with a wrong MIME type, they all download it. But when you create it through the DOM, for some reason, yeah, some of the browsers don't. And here, we're seeing like lots of browsers download stuff. They're all doing it wrong. Every browser that's downloading in any of these 3 examples is doing it incorrectly. They're breaking the spec. And I don't understand why markup's different to the DOM at all. I think I preferred it like how it felt 5 years ago, 10 years ago, where there was one bad guy, and it was Internet Explorer 8 and below, and the other browsers seemed perfect by comparison. But I think that the way the browser landscape is, it's like an orchestra, and it's just 5 years ago, Internet Explorer 8 was just this screaming child with hitting 2 cymbals together, and then we finally managed to, depending on where you work, a few of us have managed to kick Internet Explorer 8 out of the orchestra. And we came back and went, well, thank God for that, and started conducting again. And we're like, actually, everyone's slightly out of tune. I just didn't notice it before because of the screaming Internet Explorer 8 cymbal child. OK, let's do some more suffering. We've got a media attribute on this style sheet. It's set to TV. What happens on the mobile device? So, it's not a TV, or anything that is not a TV, or anything that won't identify itself as a TV, because the media attribute is largely not really used anymore, because if you've got, there's a handheld media type, but all mobile phones or modern mobile phones ignore it, because back in the day we would serve something really, really simple to those phones, and whereas modern phones, especially when the iPhone came about, they could actually render the full site, and they didn't want to be given this reduced experience. But will the browsers download it anyway, even though they're not going to use it? What do you think? I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. So we're saying no in all of the browsers. I love it when this happens, because they all will download it, all of them. The styles aren't applied, but they are downloaded. The browsers will download all of these. Like media fridge, screen and user weight 600 kilograms, style sheets. All of them. Doesn't matter what's in there. Could be something completely invalid. So don't do this. Don't put your CSS for like your desktop stuff in a separate file. Don't do this, because the browser's going to have to download both. And your rendering of your page is going to be blocked while your CSS is downloading, and 2 requests are going to be more expensive than 1 combined.
It's browser dependent on what order they're downloading it. Safari, certainly mobile will prefer the non-applicable style sheets.
That is correct. So although a mobile device is going to download both of your desktop styles and your mobile styles, it will, a decent mobile browser, which all of them are now, will render the page as soon as the desktop one is downloaded, and it will assign a lower priority No, as soon as the mobile one is downloaded, and it will assign a lower priority to the desktop styles because it knows it doesn't need them initially, although obviously things could change in the page. So, but it is still going to be downloading those bytes. It's going to be downloading all those bytes it doesn't need. So you may as well sort of, put them in the same file because your desktop is going to be hampered by this, having these two requests, certainly in HTTP 1 and 1.1. The game kind of changes when you're doing print style sheets because there are very few devices that need this up front. So you can save the bytes there. You can take the bytes out of the CSS and get to first render quickly because you can get to first render as soon as the first style sheet is downloaded. You don't have to wait for the rest, and that will just download low priority in the background, the same as mobiles do for things that don't apply. Internet Explorer, because it's still going to be more expensive than downloading one combined, but it's not going to affect rendering, and there's no device that will need those print styles up front. Internet Explorer 8 and 7 and 6, they will block rendering on this second print style sheet. And if you care about performance in those browsers, if you still have significant numbers of people there, you could put your link element at the bottom of the body. And that will mean that it discovers it later, it will get to the rendering first, and then it will pick up the style sheet and block there, but it's not going to be blocking anything because there's nothing beneath it. It's against the specification to do this, but it gets people content quicker in IE8. And for me, user experience trumps standards compliance every time. Let's get JavaScript involved again. What about this? Creating a script element, and I'm assigning a source to it, not going in the document. We saw images download at this point in all browsers as soon as the element was created. We saw link element not download in any browser at this point. So what do we think with scripts? Are we going to get some different kind of behavior here? The Wi-Fi is stable now. It seems to have been a lot better. Mike, are you getting images? Yeah, that's good. I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. So you're saying no in all of the browsers? Internet Explorer will download at this point, and it's the only one that will. It won't execute it until it's in the document, but it will start the download early. And it's allowed to do this according to the specification, although I think this specification was written after Internet Explorer said, oh, we would actually like to be able to do this. And the spec just says you may try and optimize the download by doing the download as soon as the source is applied. Only Internet Explorer does this. But it does allow you to do something interesting. You can create 2 script elements. I'm going to add a listener for the ready state change event. And this is something which is IE specific. No other browser has this. And I'm going to assign 2 different sources. Now, when I add these to the document, like I said before, they're just going to download asynchronously in parallel, and they will execute in the order that they download, which could be the wrong order. But in this listener, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait until both ready states come back as loaded, which means that the request has been completed, and then add them to the document in the order I want them to execute. And once again, the ready state property is an Internet Explorer specific thing, but it lets me sort of load scripts and control different groups of scripts that have different dependencies, and I get to control when the execution actually happens. It's kind of nice. But yeah, it relies on 2 IE-only properties, and also they removed these APIs in IE 11 because they wanted to become more standards compliant. But we are looking at script loading. We're coming up with better ways of doing this, and I'll come to that in a second. So now what Internet Explorer is doing here by starting the download early is just a performance optimization, and I don't think it's a useful one, but we should run some tests and find out. What about this? We saw a similar question to this before, adding and removing it from the document. We saw this prevent downloads in CSS, because the browser waited until that block of JavaScript was executed. But what happens here? Does something happen differently? A few of you have picked up on that Internet Explorer downloaded as soon as you assigned the source before, but maybe it does something different. It might do something different here. I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we're saying yes in IE because, we saw that sort of happen before. No in the other browsers. All of the browsers will download at this point, all of them. And they're all supposed to. This is in the specification. The user agent must synchronously prepare the script element when the script element gets inserted into the document. And preparing the script element, if it has a source, means starting the download. And the important word here is synchronously. So it must stop what it's doing with the JavaScript and run these steps, and that includes triggering the download. We're actually in a pretty bad place with script loading at the moment. I mean, we've had JavaScript in browsers for so long, but loading scripts is we're still miles off having anything that we should have. I mean, what we did at the start, I'm sure everyone in the room did this at some point, is put the scripts in the head of the page because it kind of felt like that's where they should go. As I'm sure you all know, that means that's going to block rendering until both of those have downloaded and executed. And the reason for that is they might change the shape of the document. They might do a document.write with a comment in to hide some images or whatever kind of hackery is going on. So don't do that. Don't put scripts in the head. Common advice for quite a long time now is to move them down to the bottom of the body. But that's not great either, because it means the browser is going to discover those scripts later than other things on your page. And so this preparser is going to go ahead and go hunting for stuff, but it still has to download all of your CSS, all of your HTML before it can get to these script elements. And if you've got like a decent amount of content, that could delay the browser starting to download the scripts. And obviously, if they're starting later, they are finishing later as well. We could move them into the head of the document, again, but give them the defer attribute. And that means it won't block rendering of the page, and they will download in parallel, and they will execute in order sometime after DOM ready. And amazingly, Internet Explorer has had this feature since IE4 back in 1997, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, the implementation had a bug so big you couldn't really use it in production with confidence at all. And unfortunately, that bug was carried through into IE5 and 5.5 and 6 and 7. Oh, and 8. Oh, and 9 as well, actually. They did fix it in 10, though, thankfully. The bug is actually amazing. I love this bug. So if you've got you've got a script that depends on jQuery and does stuff with jQuery, and you've got jQuery at the start, and they both have defer. If one of these scripts touches the DOM in a few particular ways, which jQuery does as part of its feature detection stuff, I will stop executing that script and move on to the next one, and it'll wait for it to download as well. So it's parsing the next script in the middle of it executing jQuery. And that's going to cause you problems if your script depends on jQuery, because jQuery is only half-formed at this point. Like, your script's going to walk in and go, what's going on with jQuery? And then you're going to call like a jQuery call method, and jQuery's just going to go, killed me. And, what have you done to my script, IE? What have you done? So don't do that. We can't do that until IE 10, IE less than 10 falls off the radar. And I imagine IE 8 will take longer to do that than IE 9. We could use async, but like when you're loading scripts, adding scripts to the DOM with JavaScript, they're going to execute as soon as they download, and that could be in either order. So that's not great if you've got script dependencies. The DOM actually provides a really neat trick here. So here I've got an array of script URLs, and I'm going to loop through them. And for each one, I'm creating a script element, giving it a source, adding it to the document. Usually that would execute in the order that they download, but I've also put script.async equals false. And this is a weird corner of the specification. That means it will download them asynchronously, and they'll let them download in any order, but it will keep execution order as to the order that they were added to the document. It doesn't matter where in the document, it's just the order they were added. So that's pretty cool. But because we're doing this in JavaScript, it's now invisible to the preparser. The preparser is going to come along, zoom through the document. It doesn't execute script, because that's quite a heavy thing to do comparatively, so it's not going to discover this. And we saw before that has quite a good speed increase. The Internet Explorer ready state thing has the same issue as well. It's, because you're doing it in JavaScript, it's invisible to the preparser. The best thing you can do right now in terms of script loading is combine everything into one file and make it async. And that way you don't have the loading order problem. But having everything in one file is going to become an anti-pattern in HTTP 2. So that's not great either. I mean, but seriously, if you're putting stuff at the bottom of the body, and you're doing pretty well. Especially if you've got things that you want to maintain execution order. That's pretty good. But we have been working on a solution to this. We've been proposing this to the WhatWG, and it looks like we might come to some kind of consensus around, this is my favorite proposal, is adding a new attribute called needs, or whatever the attribute would be called. But what it does is you would give it, I'm proposing it should be a CSS selector, because I like this idea. And it would, when you add it to the document, it will go looking for all of the scripts that match that CSS selector, and it will download straight away, but it'll wait. It won't execute until all of the scripts which match that selector have executed as well. So this way you can create this kind of complex dependency tree, but because it's done at document add time, you don't get you don't get any kind of race conditions, or well, you could create race conditions, but you don't get any loops, any circular dependencies. So here, 10 minutes. All right. Okay, I'll speed up. So here I've got like two dependency files, and in one file that depends on one of them, another file that depends on both. And this will let like the carousel and the rich text thing load in either order, but only when its dependencies are there. And same with the inline script, that will only load when the carousel's there. I think this will be really useful in HTTP2, where having a lot of independently cacheable assets will be the faster thing to do. And as a fallback, the browsers are just going to execute this synchronously and block. But that's a nice fallback. It actually works. And that's why we've got the needs attribute, which is empty on the first script element, which I'm not awfully fond of. It's just to trigger the async loading, but without any dependencies. We could just put async on there, and that would work in modern browsers, but your fallback situation wouldn't be so good. That's going to load in a different order. OK, if we've got 10 minutes, let's do some other stuff. Let's ignore that bit. Let's talk about web fonts, and we could make this the last question. We all love web fonts, right? I mean, especially... Oh, hi. So the reason is, so we look at this second example here. It's the dependencies that it has are worked out when the script element is added to the DOM, or when it's parsed. So the first script element there in the second block, if we took that in isolation, like we ignored the stuff above it, the first one would look for other script elements, find none, and have no dependencies. The second script element would look for dependencies, and it would find the one just before it, and it would have that as a dependency. The third one would have the other two as a dependency. So because it takes CSS selectors, we're saying here be dependent on all of the scripts that are there on the document when I'm added to the DOM. So this is actually a way of doing that async equals false behavior, but with markup, so it'll be picked up by the preparser. So although it looks like there's an interdependency, when the first script element is created, there are no others there. And the dependency tree is built just once per script element. So I'm in a hotel. I've got hotel Wi-Fi. So I'm staring at a blank page while web fonts load. It's kind of ridiculous how web font loading is happening at the moment, because they come in after the CSS and they take an extra chunk of time. But what do we think about this? I'm defining a web font, but I'm not referencing it in CSS or any particular rules. What do we think? What do you think? Are any of the browsers going to download it at this point? We saw with background images, they don't download until they appear on an element, but our web font's operating differently. I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. So we're saying yes in all of the browsers, slightly more in Internet Explorer. No, none of the browsers are going to make a request here. This used to be a problem. This was a problem in Internet Explorer 6, 7, and 8. Not a problem now. They fixed it in 9. If you're serving fonts to 6, 7, and 8, you might want to take extra caution around this. What about this? So now I am actually using it in a CSS rule. But what do you think? Does this change anything? Is this going to change the pattern? Once again, it's not going to be used on the page. So maybe like a background image, it won't download it. I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. So we're saying yes in all of the browsers. I'm stringing you along again. Sorry, none of the browsers are going to download it at this point. The browsers are still being pretty smart. But now I have a paragraph. Are the browsers going to download the font now? The paragraph is empty, though. So once again, the browser doesn't actually need that font file, because it's not going to render any text. But it's just the existence of that paragraph enough to trigger the download. I'm going to close the question in 3, 2, 1. So we're edging towards yes now, because we would see this happen with CSS backgrounds, right? The element just needs to be there. Even if the element's 0 by 0 pixels, it would still download. With web fonts, Firefox and IE will download. The WebKit browsers are smarter. They realize there's no text to render, so I'm not going to download. So we'll make this the last question, and then the explanation afterwards. So see if you can get any final points on this. I'm using Unicode range. Here's the difference here. And I'm saying up front that this font only has lowercase a to z in it, or that's the only characters I'm interested in using of that font. You should ignore the rest. So, and the paragraph has text in it, but it's all uppercase characters. So once again, we're in a situation where the browser doesn't need that font file. But is it going to download it anyway? And are the browsers going to do different things? Closing the question, 3, 2, 1. In this case, yes, all of the browsers will download. That will trigger, even though it doesn't need to. The spec is really historically vague about this, but the new draft, which I completely agree with, user agents must not download or use fonts for code points outside the Unicode range set. They are all getting it wrong here. And I've been wanting to rant about how browsers download fonts for a while, but then I think about WWF's Andre the Giant, who said this. I don't like to speak badly of people. I have grown up thinking and being told that if you cannot say something nice about someone, you should not say anything at all. I think that's, yeah. Oh, but I must break that rule in this case because I hate Hulk Hogan very much. He is a big ugly goon and I want to squash his face. I love that. And I want to squish browsers over this rendering behavior, because CSS blocks rendering, and that's bad. But then we end up with these web fonts that, after the CSS are downloaded, they block rendering as well, and we've got this horrible problem here. And I think the spec here is strict for a good reason, where I can say that, oh, I can actually split my fonts into multiple files, even the same font family name, have a different Unicode range, and say, I want the first file to be a nice small light file and deal with 99% of cases. But then here's an extra file with the rest in. That could be a big file dealing with lots of different languages and fancy accents or whatever. And that would be like hundreds of K, but very rarely used. And the browser would just do the right thing. WebKit used to do this. WebKit actually had this behavior, and they took it out, and I think it's a real shame. We are working on this on Chrome, where we are going to fix this. But I guess I am slowly running out of time, so we will have a look at the final rankings. Well, so yes, we've got a new leader. Where's P. Minan?
That's not fair. He's smart.
Right. Well, you are welcome to a book. But let's say how many books have I got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's say the top 10 here. Test, excellent. Okay, brilliant. The top 10 here. Come and get yourselves a book, because yeah, you deserve it. You've managed to not have a negative score, which is very, very easy to do in this quiz. And with that, I will say thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the sessions today and tomorrow. Thank you.
We could go maybe 5 over if you want to do some Q&A.
I can do a Q&A. I also have other questions if people are feeling particularly sadomasochist. I don't know.
Hi. First of all, condolences for losing 6 hours of work.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that was horrible. Yes.
Now, with web fonts, cross-origin resource sharing, Mozilla has a bug that's been open since 2009 that basically blocks cross-origin resource sharing with web fonts.
Yes.
And I've been looking at the ticket, and it looks like Blink is going to join that camp. Is that true?
From what I've heard, yeah. So currently, if you need to, the font requests are calls based. So if it's another server and it doesn't say specifically, I want you to be able to use this font, it won't render. I don't have the spec in my head.
I think the spec says block.
The spec says calls fetch.
WebKit browsers ignore that spec.
It doesn't strike me as something that should be a calls fetch, because images aren't, background images aren't, scripts aren't. I imagine this was something that was done to keep the font foundries happy. And there's so much. I mean, WAF as a web font format is useless. There is nothing you get from WAF that you don't get from TTF plus gzip. WAF 2, different story, better compression. But it's just some circus to make it look like people are trying to be DRM'd. I agree with you, it shouldn't do it.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to go away.